Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. Just weeks after taking office, the Trump administration is making sweeping policy changes. Top officials have hinted at reduced troop deployments abroad, countering China, and higher tariffs. The goal of complete denuclearization of North Korea has also been reaffirmed after President Trump called North Korea a nuclear power. Today we discuss what all this means for the U.S.-RK alliance.
To immediately begin the construction of a state-of-the-art Iron Dome missile defense shield, which will be able to protect Americans.
We should be sparing. We shouldn't send them everywhere.
In the studio with me, Mr. Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Klingner spent 20 years at the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency and served as CIA's Deputy Division Chief for Korea. Also joining us, Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks and National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as Senior Analyst for U.S. Forces Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us back.
Now, Mr. Klingner, do you expect competition between the United States and China to intensify under the second Trump administration? What will be the key elements of President Trump's pressure against China, and how far will it go?
I think China will be the preeminent foreign policy objective or focus of the Trump administration. Initially, sort of the hot spots, Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, may come to the forefront, but really the priority issue for the administration will be China. And really everyone in Washington right now is a China hawk. It's just a matter of degree or what issues to press China on most strongly. And that really is across the political aisle. So I think once the administration really gets all in place and moves away from the initial focus on domestic issues or immigration towards foreign policy, China will be the big issue. And we've seen that Secretary of State Rubio and Secretary of Defense Hegseth have already talked about China. So we don't know what the details will be, but I think it will be across the board. There will be a pushback on China's coercive, intimidating actions against its neighbors. There will be threats of or implementation of tariffs against Chinese predatory business practices. And there will even be sort of domestic issues against perhaps Chinese students or Chinese purchase of land near military bases in the United States. So it's going to be very all-encompassing and very strong.
Mr. Seiler, amid such intensifying rivalry between the United States and China, will the U.S.-South Korea alliance be reconstructed? Will it be somewhat similar to the relations under the first Trump administration?
Well, I think obviously there's going to be differences from the first Trump administration. This is, we're 4 years later after the fact, and President Trump has a cumulative experience of working the North Korea issue, Korea Peninsula issues, as well as the broader Asia issues. And I do believe, as Bruce mentioned, the U.S.-PRC rivalry will generate kind of a new dynamic in the region. And, with the Republic of Korea, we have a like-minded alliance who is a partner on a range of issues, national security, economic, and others, that naturally will be seen, I think, by President Trump as an asset in advancement of his broader, policy objectives in the region.
And Mr. Seiler, some Koreans suggest more strategic dialogue between Seoul and Beijing amid the heated competition between the United States and China so that neither side will have misunderstanding about each other, so that there will be no repeat of China's retaliation against South Korea after what happened after the THAAD deployment in Korea. If Seoul were to make moves to make those strategic communications with Beijing and have even more and have strengthened those communications, wouldn't there be a risk of stirring up misunderstanding or resentment from the Trump administration?
Absolutely not. One of the misnomers of regarding U.S. policy toward the region, whether it's a Democratic or a Republican president, is that somehow it's a zero-sum game, and that every minute of the day that South Korea pays attention to China is to the detriment of U.S. ROK relations. Indeed, as a partner in the region, we want the ROK out there engaging with China. So that Beijing hears in multi-channel stereo the talking points, our concerns about their security, there are concerns about their military aggressiveness, our concerns about their economic coercion. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with the ROK seeking to develop a relationship that what they could then use to leverage Beijing to act more in the direction of good. So being a partner on China doesn't mean we talk to China and the ROK doesn't, or the ROK isn't allowed to talk to China. That's just a misperception of the dynamics of diplomacy.
How about if South Korea goes to the extent of cooperating with the United States on military and defense issues and economic issues with China, balance between the two sides, hedges, and strengthens cooperation with China? Isn't there a chance that the United States may pile pressure on Seoul?
Well, more than pressure, it's urging Seoul to look at the reality of Beijing and its behaviors. We're not, ignorant of the heavy reliance on the PRC that the ROK has in terms of economic interest as a trade partner, as a source for many of the materials that go into manufactured products that the ROK places. What we're saying is that, this reliance comes with risk. This reliance on China comes with cost. THAAD was a good example of that. THAAD was not the fault of the United States forcing upon the Republic of Korea a critical weapon system for its defense. And it really wasn't the fault of the ROK doing this against the wishes of China. China's behavior was indicative of the type of behavior that we have seen in the past, we see now, and we'll see in the future. And I think the ROK would benefit greatly from working with the United States and other like-minded countries to, in the realm of economic security, to deny PRC of this economic coercive tool.
Mr. Klingner, Vice President Vance said this week that the Trump administration will be sparing in its use of U.S. military forces around the world. Could his view lead to changes in the size and the role of U.S. forces Korea as the Trump administration seeks to contain China? Will USFK be a subject for role adjustment or subject for further strengthening?
Well, I think when every administration comes in, they do an Indo-Pacific strategy review, they do a global posture review on where our forces are deployed overseas. So that's not unusual. And I think right now, because the administration has only been in a very short time, and there have not been specific policy announcements, we're reliant on interpreting or over-interpreting a few words from nominees to cabinet positions, et cetera. So he points out that our sons and daughters, and I have a son in the Marine Corps, are very precious resources for America. We don't want to waste them needlessly. We don't want to put them in harm's way unless it is in U.S. strategic interest, and we want to deploy them in the proper area. So with U.S. Forces Korea, it's only 28,500 forces there. They're not going to move elsewhere for a Taiwan contingency, but they are very important not only as a sign of our commitment, but a show of our capabilities against the North Korean threat. And they could also be used as the basis for follow-on forces that could either go towards North Korea or a Taiwan contingency. So I think overall, whether it's U.S. forces Korea or just in the region, the U.S. is going to be looking for Korea and other allies and partners in the region to play a bigger role against the very expansive China threat.
Mr. Seiler, a former official in the Office of the Secretary of Defense during the first Trump administration, told VOA on this program that real options to reduce USFK were developed at the time, and the only reason it was not implemented was because the clock ran out. Do you think President Trump's reported skepticism for South Korea's role and capabilities as an ally and the usefulness of the U.S. forces Korea will continue into the second term?
Yeah, that's so hard to assess. Will he see a value in bringing troops home? It's a long way out. For now, though, the fact that he speaks about the need for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, reduction of tensions, the value of having a U.S. ROK alliance, to me speaks positively. It's not going to be an easy road ahead. Standing assumptions will be questioned, but that's okay. We should be able to, if the U.S. forces are so critical, we should be able to justify them as such. And if not, shifting capabilities, force structure, alignment, et cetera, is something that we all should expect. There's nothing static in this world.
Mr. Klingner, if there's an opportunity to negotiate with North Korea, do you think the Trump administration might temporarily or permanently suspend joint exercises with the RK? We've seen this during the first Trump administration.
Right. There's a very real possibility. When we think back to 2018, when President Trump unilaterally canceled military exercises and the rotational deployment of strategic assets, that was not in any way an agreement with North Korea. North Korea had announced in April of that year that they wouldn't be doing more nuclear or long-range missile tests, as they are required not to do under 11 UN resolutions. So it was very clear from the post-Singapore summit press conference that President Trump had done that unilaterally, not as any part of negotiations. His comments during that press conference made clear it was he didn't like the cost or the perceived cost of the exercises. He called them provocative war games. And so he cut them, to the great surprise of the Secretary of Defense, the Department of Defense, our allies, and U.S. Forces Korea. In August of 2024, North Korea said they didn't care which candidate won the election. They both represented a hostile policy, and North Korea didn't want to talk to either one of them. But they would be willing to talk if the next president canceled military exercises and rotational deployments. So President Trump has canceled them unilaterally before. He may do it again because of his perception of how expensive they are. And he may do it either just unilaterally or as part of a way of inducing North Korea back to the table.
I want to move on to the nuclear issue. Mr. Klingner, before President Trump's first term, there were many reports that President Trump wasn't against South Korea's nuclear armament, but rather might consider it as an effective defense strategy for the United States to check against North Korea and China. Is this an accurate portrayal or misunderstanding?
Well, I do remember he did an interview with the New York Times in 2016 when asked should Korea and Japan go nuclear, and he said sort of, yes, why not? But it was a very short discussion on that topic, even when the reporter sort of tried to keep coming back to it. I don't really remember comments on that topic by President Trump since then. So it's a very old comment that was almost made in passing. So there are some who advocate, both in Washington and Seoul, that South Korea go nuclear. But I think, as we've talked about on this program before, there are a lot of consequences that would happen to South Korea if they were to go down that path. Automatic actions by the Nuclear Suppliers Group, by the United States if they conducted a nuclear test. So the president may, if asked, say, yes, Korea should go nuclear. Why only have the bad guys have nuclear weapons? But there are a lot of consequences for South Korea, for the region, if they do so. So it's a topic that you can't just answer in passing. It has to have a very lengthy policy review.
Mr. Seiler, President Trump values direct interaction with leaders, but given the political turmoil in South Korea, dialogue and summits are difficult at this time. Wouldn't the Trump administration feel frustrated that they cannot cooperate and coordinate at the leader level on important issues like shipbuilding?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a frustration in Washington as much as there should be a frustration in Seoul. that right now, the political situation domestically complicates a range of issues, foreign and domestic, and that there isn't a single voice coming out. In fact, there's a very contradictory voice. One voice that applauds the strength of the alliance and calls for strengthened readiness and deterrence of a growing North Korean nuclear threat, and is aware of the challenges posed by China, and values the trilateral cooperation, which has allowed Korea, Japan, and the United States to respond in unison on critical national security issues. And another partner who sees all of that as treasonable, or at least worthy of inclusion in the first impeachment motion. So, resolving where Korea sees itself in the world, in the region, and even on the peninsula vis-a-vis North Korea, I think is going to be a priority going forward. And then we can see whether Seoul will be a cooperative partner or not on these critical issues. And I think from a U.S. perspective, we're watching, we're observing, we're assessing, and to a degree we'll be hedging because we don't know how the process will turn out. And so, stay tuned, and we'll see how this unfolds over the coming months.
And in that context, Mr. Seiler, some critics in Korea say President Yoon Suk-yeol's U.S.-aligned value-based diplomacy is no longer valid because they say President Trump himself has shown little interest in value-based diplomacy, and that there is another variable in the U.S.-RK relations, which is that President Trump's expressed interest in pursuing diplomacy with North Korea, which is South Korea's stated main enemy. Do you agree? How should South Korea approach the U.S.-South Korea relations?
Yeah, I don't know that you can look at value-based diplomacy as, giving insight into what is actually behind that. It isn't a matter of values like democratic versus authoritarian or capitalist versus communist. I think it's a reality.
Clearly, the Biden administration made it very explicit that they pursue value-based diplomacy, that they pursue cooperation with democratic countries.
Be that as it may, as it's used on the peninsula, what the behind those accusations are. The diplomatic approach of the Yoon Suk-yeol government, which sought a close cooperation with the United States, cooperation with Japan, a more realist view of China, and was willing to act in concert within the alliance, kind of most evidenced, right, in the Camp David summit and the resulting outcomes of that, that this advanced Korea's interests and values or no values, it really doesn't matter. This was both a mix of kind of, to use classical international relations terms, idealism and realism. Right? And so it wasn't one or the other. And the challenge, those who say value-based diplomacy is dead are those who would say no longer are we going to be fools in how we engage with Japan. We are going to be very cognizant of our actions and how they might offend China, Russia, and North Korea. We will scale back our exercises so as not to intimidate North Korea that much. And we will definitely try to carve out some middle ground between Beijing and Washington. That's really the conflict, I think, that's taking place. And I don't think in any way that, values-based diplomacy or somehow the diplomacy that we had under the Yoon Suk-yeol government, if continued, would have been anathema to anything Donald Trump is pursuing. He, too, is looking towards the same economic and security objectives in the region that we had been working with the Yoon administration over the past few years.
Mr. Klingner, President Trump recently referred to North Korea as a nuclear power and said that he gets along with Kim Jong-un. After the comment raised eyebrows among Asian allies, the White House said that President Trump will pursue the complete denuclearization of North Korea, just as he did in his first term. What is President Trump's perception and goal when it comes to North Korea's nuclear issue, do you think? And for the U.S., which strives for maximum security, especially President Trump, who values the security of U.S. citizens, wouldn't tolerating even a small part of North Korea's nuclear weapons be a viable option?
Well, I think, again, I'm going to have to fall back to we don't know. Certainly, Mr. Trump's and Mr. Hegseth's comments about North Korea's nuclear power did raise perceptions that the U.S. had already decided to abandon denuclearization. And then we saw the National Security Council spokesperson say, no, denuclearization remains the policy. So you can assess that North Korea has nuclear weapons, but that doesn't mean you accept or acknowledge them. So it's, I think, reassuring by having the administration saying denuclearization remains the policy. Then you get down to, well, will North Korea ever talk to us? They haven't talked to us for 5 years. And then if we do get into negotiations, denuclearization may be an end goal, but it will take quite some time to get there. And there was a misperception, I think, that the first term Trump administration's policy was the John Bolton Libya model of everything had to be done in 18 months and North Korea got nothing until we got everything. Other comments by Mr. Bolton and others showed that it was sort of the traditional, it's incremental, it will take a long time, each side does baby steps. So what we need to do is have very detailed agreements that identify the steps necessary by each side until we eventually get, if not to denuclearization, at least down the road. There is a concern in South Korea that we will only focus on the threats to the American homeland, ICBMs, and allow shorter range missiles. So we need to allay our allies' concerns by ensuring we go after all of the nuclear weapons and all of the missiles.
So, this goes to a misperception that somehow there's a binary choice between denuclearization and deterrence. When indeed, if you look at the history of this issue, first of all, we have put on the table in front of North Korea incremental packages that tolerated, accepted, acknowledged, or knew in the back of our head that North Korea would have nuclear weapons till some point in the future. But along the way, we could reduce threat, reduce growth, and gradually achieve some type of rollback. It's never been a problem that somehow we had poorly drafted agreements and an arms control agreement would lock them in. It's all up to North Korea's intent. And the problem is North Korea's intent is not to put anything on the table. So we can do denuclearization and deterrence simultaneously. We can have the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security Council spokesperson, anybody pronounce that, or the candidate for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence position, they could say we're going to have a focus on reducing threat. That doesn't mean we give up on denuclearization. And indeed, for the past 70 years, our policy in North Korea has always been about reducing threat. So I wouldn't get too wound up about somehow North Korea advancing some goal of locking in its nuclear weapons status simply because of a few words or formulations.
The past 30 years, United States negotiated with North Korea. I think people's concern is not only about binary issue of whether deterrence or denuclearization, but United States engaging with North Korea for 30 years, that path to denuclearization, North Korea only bought time and played United States and kept its weapons.
Right. And what was the option? What was the alternative? I think historians will look at this and say all along, for the past 30 years...
Maybe that's why people want get to the denuclearization quickly and fast, and not get played out
through
by
the use of force.
North Korea.
Because we weren't going to get there in a negotiated manner. What would we have given North Korea that could have done it?
Wasn't President Trump going for that in Hanoi to get that...
that's right.
Try to extract more from North Korea?
Because once again, from October 2002, when Assistant Secretary Jim Kelly first sat down with the North Koreans to talk about their highly enriched uranium program and tell Hanoi, indeed up to today, North Korea has been absolute denial that there's any program outside of that little 5-megawatt reactor at Yongbyon. And their refusal to talk about this is not some verification issue or some technicality. This is the program. This is a threat. And to get this little piece is meaningless. And Kim Jong-un repeated what his father did, which was, we'll put the 5-megawatt reactor up for sale. In fact, ideally, I think they wanted us to take it and decommission it because they wanted to get it off their hands, and we could have paid the hundreds of millions of dollars for a reactor decommissioning. But all along, if North Korea had any sense of wanting to move seriously down a better path of relations with the U.S., that inevitably would involve some restrictions on slowing the growth of and rolling back of the program, he missed opportunity after opportunity to pursue that because they're not interested in it.
Let's continue our conversation next time. We're all of the time we have for today. Mr. Seiler, Mr. Klingner, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.